Okay, so let's do the unwrap while we're here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to edges, and I'm going to double click on this top edge. Now let me explain something about unwrapping. So when you're unwrapping stuff, you have to know where to basically create seams so that you can open this object up and lay it flat. So every time you're unwrapping, you got to kind of think about this thing as like either a box that you got from Amazon or something where you want to cut a seam down and open that box flat. Or in this case, it could be even a pelt, like if you're talking about an organic object, like an animal, you would want to be able to open it up like a taxidermist would or something and make a blanket out of it. I know it's gross, but whatever. Um, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch to my UV editing mode, and I really like this layout that they do. And what it does is allow you to look at your object in 3D and then also look at your UVs over here on this side. So first thing I'm going to do is grab all the faces, and I'm just going to put a planar map on it. What that's going to do is it's going to join all of the any of the original UVs are gone. It's going to join all the verts together. And I don't really need that other than I want it for, well, I do need it because the way I unwrap this is a method that I need everything joined together in the beginning. So what I have to do now is I have to pick my edges. And let me just try to explain a little bit about why I would pick the edges I was picked. So this would be my first edge that I know I'm going to have to cut. And the reason why is because the curve that comes around here, um, when you're trying to unfold this and relax this, it is not going to solve properly to try to go all the way around this curve. Okay, so I'm going to need to cut that right there so that I can relieve basically like what I would call a tension point. Okay, and you got the same thing down here, so you'd have to relieve a tension point just by cutting that as well. And then of course we have kind of the same thing going on here too. We could probably cut it here, but I think I'm going to cut it here. So I'm just double clicking, grabbing the edge loop here. Okay. And then the same thing is, since this is a tube, you have to think about like you have to cut one edge of the tube open so that you can lay it flat. So we're going to cut that there. So I just shift double click on that. And then as far as the mug goes, you have to think that this is actually kind of a tube as well. So we have to have an opening so that you can lay the tube flat. Otherwise, it won't open. This will all make sense in a second when I go ahead and get through with this and I do a cut. So just give it one more second. I want to come down to here. And so what I just did there was I hit shift, or I shift clicked here and then shift double click down here. What that does is it grabs the whole edge loop between these 2 points. Now I'm going to just hold shift and double click here, and that's going to grab the edge loop in the bottom. Now, I've done this a lot, so I know the kind of seams I usually need in an object. I'm pretty good at it. I've been unwrapping for, over 10 years. So I usually know where to cut my stuff up to get good seams that will unwrap properly and give me, good tension points and stuff, or release tension points, I should say. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hit cut. But if you don't know exactly how to pick out these points yet or these edges yet, don't worry because it does take some time and some practice to get to that point. Um, One thing to remember whenever you're, making open cuts for your UVs, try to do it in the most hidden spot. So if you think about the inside of this handle versus the outside of the inside of the handle is going to be better. And going up here, up and down here, that's going to be better doing it this way um, underneath this handle point than it would be like out here in the middle. So it just because you're usually not going to have like any graphics that go in here, or it's going to be hidden more. Same thing with down here. You go on the inside. The inside's not as important as far as where you put the seams, but it just makes sense to extend the seam here all the way through to here. Okay, and so now that I've got all these seams cut, and I hit cut on my keyboard, and so if I turn this on and off, you can kind of see what's happening. Like this little tool right here makes your open UV edges look thicker. So I'm just scrolling my wheel back and forth, like in and out. Um, and this right here just shows where I just made that cut. Okay, in your UV view, I could grab like all of these faces, just double click, and you can see now actually we've got what are called UV islands. So whenever I click on something that's isolated to its own UV island, it will only select that. So actually, the UVs can actually be a pretty good selection tool for just grabbing um, a set of polygons. You can use it for that, although I don't typically, but it could be used for that. Let's turn this off right now. This is the modeling toolkit. I don't want my edge slide on. All right, so I can come into here and I can right click and go UVs or to UV shell. And in this case, um, Maya will allow me to like go over different shells. Let's see here. And I can actually, you have to be in the UV view, of course, and you can actually grab the whole UV shell. I'm in this UV shell selection tool now, so it's letting me know where the UV shells are. I'm going to get out of that, just go to UVs, or go to faces. I'm going to double click on this, or let's just take all of them for that matter. And we're going to do, many programs call what I'm about to do is an unwrap. Maya calls it an unfold. Okay, so I'm going to just unfold everything. And you're going to see like, oh, what's that? We got these like everything's opening up. Well, what happened is Maya took um, all the seams and then all the information in between them, and it basically kind of did this relaxation type of thing where it tries to get it to a shape that represents this, the space that's in these polygons and in this 3D as best as can on here. And so it's a little bit weirdly laid out right now. And so the way to fix that is you can do this thing called orient shells. So that the unfold was under the unfold drop down, of course. And the orient shells is under the arrange and layout. So I'm going to hit orient shells. And you can see it starts straightening stuff. This right here is the outermost part, and I can tell that because if you look at like this cut here, you can see that that's kind of that cut there. So if I went ahead and just selected these in this 3D view, you can see that now it's selected in the 2D view. Okay, same thing down here. So those are those, and these are these, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You want to make sure that like if you're selecting the top here, that you're also selecting the top here. So have these things oriented the right way. So if this thing was actually oriented and it was flipped upside down, you'd definitely want to like reverse that. So I just did an undo, but you'd want to make sure that these are oriented the right way. So like this one is not oriented the right way. This one is like turned on its side. So I'm going to click on this and I can see that that's actually at the bottom. So if I double click and I select this whole thing, I can just grab the rotation wheel and I can start turning it so it's facing the right way. Um, so I can go ahead and if I wanted to, I could say orient shell, and you can see it straightened it out a little bit. So that was nice. It didn't solve it right the first time, but that's not the end of the world because you can kind of play around with it and it will fix it. All right, the next thing we could do is we could select everything and we could hit layout. And what layout will do is layout will lay these all out within what's called the 0 to 1 space. So what does that mean? Well, here's the 0 and here's the 1 in the x, and here's 0, and here's 1 in the y. Okay, oh, well, I say x and y, but in Maya speak, that would be the u and the v. So the u basically translate to the x-axis, and the v translates to the y-axis. So that's your 2D space. They just call it U and V so you can differentiate between if you're talking about like the 3D viewport or if you're talking about the 2D viewport. Okay, so that's why the UVs are just named something different. It's more of like a formality for communication's sake. Okay, so now one of the things to point out is that in my layout, which is right here, the options, I actually have this setting on that's preserve 3D ratio. Now by default, that is off. Let me just undo. So this is uh, I before I went ahead and did the layout. And if we were to turn on uh, our checkers here, let's see. That's interesting. This thing looks a little bit different than mine does on my other computer, and so I'm not seeing my. I think it's the size of this. I'm not seeing my checkers. Let's see. It's usually, is this it? And, well, it's not showing up for me. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong one. I'm sorry. That's the one I was looking for. Okay, my bad. All right, look at this. See how big these checkers look on the bottom here? But then when you look at the rest of the checkers, they look pretty small. And then these here, I mean, like, what's even going on with these on the bottom? I don't even know where those are. Okay, well, the problem that we're having here is that in the 2D viewport, these are not scaled in proportion to one another. Okay, and that's a problem because usually you want them to have the same texel density. Uh, Texture to pixel ratio is what texel density is. So you want them to have like the same, they would use up the same texture space, like if it was 512 by 512 pixels. You'd want each one to, not that each thing is going to use up 512 pixels, 512 pixels, but that they would proportionately use up the same amount. So basically, this little guy down here is just way too small. But watch what happens if you pull out the scale tool and I start scaling it. Well, now we're getting closer to them being the right texel density. Okay, now the other side of this is if you're getting really way more advanced, you would find that like if you're never going to see the inside of this cup, then you might not want to give it that much texel density because no one would ever notice it anyway, right? So that's another thing to think about, but that's for a later class. I'm going to deselect that. Okay, so here you can see we've got, am I still selected something up there? I guess I am. There we go. So this part right here, it looks like it's so small that I can't even see it. So I don't even know what's going on there. I'm going to grow my selection, which is shift greater than symbol. And let's see if we can scale this up. So I think this thing is actually taking up like 0 UV space, so you can't even scale it up because it's not even in the positive yet. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use this tool here and turn on uh, pre-scaling. So just hit that and hit apply. And then what happens is that it's taken all of my stuff and it's scaled them so that they coordinate with one another. It should be pretty close. Okay, it may not be 100% perfect, but you can also scale them by hand if you need be. Now this one, it didn't fix this bottom part. So I'm going to have to do something about that. I'm going to go to vertex, just select the center vertex, hold control on my keyboard and right click and hold and go two faces. Two faces, and then I'm going to just grow that selection again, like I said before, which is shift greater than. And so it didn't know what to do with it. The tool didn't know what to do with it because of the fact that it has no good scale to it. So for whatever reason, this one did not work. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to planar map this. So I'm just going to hit planar map. And I can tell you what's going on here is that that's perfectly flat. And when this thing's projecting its planar map, it's doing it on, let's see, the z-axis. And in the z-axis, this thing actually has no space. So what we need to do is change this to a different axis. So let's go into our channel box. So we just click on that to get our channel box to pop up. And instead of this thing being on the z-axis, let's change that. Let's go ahead and we'll rotate it on the x-axis. 90 degrees should be fine. Okay, now we're getting something. So now we basically gave it some space. Now it's huge, it doesn't look right, and that's because we have this projection width is at 5 or is at 12 and the projection height is at 0. So we want to change this. We're just going to say we're going to make them both 12. And look at that. So now we've got the right shape there. All right. We're getting there, but we still don't have the right texel density that I mentioned before. So I'm going to hit W on my keyboard. I've selected everything, and I'm just going to use this layout tool again, and it's going to help me out and pack them all together. And now I'm going to bring my checkers back out just to look, and well, what do you know? Everything looks pretty darn good at this point. So we have a decent UV layout. Decent. I mean, there's a few things we could do, but for these purposes, for the purposes of this first assignment, this will be fine. Um, so this particular piece right here, this outer piece, we are going to make a texture graphic and put that on this area right here. So in our texture, we'll have an area right here that we'll put some kind of symbol or something, and maybe it'll be over here if we want it like more on the side of the cup, like right in this area or in this area. And that way we'll distinguish this cup from everybody else's cup. So it'll be our own coffee mug. The inside, you could put a graphic here too, but normally nobody would see that because it's going to be filled with some kind of liquid. So let's leave it where it's at this point and say, yes, this was cool. And we're going to go back and make it even better when we put our own graphic and material on there. So signing off and see you in the next one.